We are on topic 3, post-harvest technology of coffee.
You know that morning cup of coffee? For so many of us, it's a ritual. It's just essential. But behind that amazing smell and that first perfect sip, there's this fascinating hidden story that starts way before the beans ever get roasted. So today we're going to pull back the curtain on that secret journey. Just picture that perfect cup for a second. That rich aroma, the perfect balance of flavors. Maybe you get a little hint of fruit or chocolate. It seems so simple, but what you're holding is actually the final chapter of this huge, globe-spanning agricultural adventure.
I mean, is it just the roast or the brand? Maybe how you brew it? Well, yeah, all that matters, but the real answer is way more surprising. It goes much deeper, right back to the exact moment the coffee cherry gets picked from the branch. Okay, let's get into it.
We're going to start with what is, without a doubt, the single biggest factor in how your coffee tastes. And I can almost guarantee it's not what you're thinking. It's this huge secret that happens right after the coffee is harvested. Here it is. Get this. A whopping 60% of a coffee's final quality and flavor is decided by how it's processed after it's picked. That's right. What happens to the coffee cherry in those first few hours and days has more of an impact on the taste than the roasting does. The other 40%? Well, all of that potential is locked in while the bean is still on the tree. So let's jump back to the very beginning, to the farm, where that initial 40% of a bean's destiny is set. This is all about the plant itself and, the world it grows up in.
In the huge world of coffee, there are really two main players that dominate everything. First, you've got Arabica. It makes up about 64% of all the coffee grown. It originally came from Ethiopia, and it's the one that gives you those sweet, complex notes we all love. The chocolate, the fruit, the caramel. And then you've got Robusta. And just like the name sounds, it's a tougher plant. It's cheaper, it's easier to grow, but the flavor is a whole different story. Much bolder, more bitter. Some even say it has a kind of rubbery taste. And you can literally see the difference on the plant itself. Here on the left, you've got Arabica cherries. See how they grow kind of elegantly along the stem? And then on the right, there's Robusta, all bunched up in these tighter, more robust clusters. These are the two different starting lines for pretty much every coffee you've ever had. But it's not just about the species, right? So much else is going on. The age of the tree, for example, is a huge deal. The best beans often come from trees that are between 15 and 20 years old. Things like proper pruning and keeping the plants healthy matter too, and even whether it's grown in the shade or in the direct sun can change things, leading to bigger, more balanced beans. All of this just sets the stage for what comes next. Okay, now we're at the main event, that crucial 60%. Once those perfect, ripe, red cherries are picked, the farmer has to get the bean out from inside, and the path they choose right here is going to completely change how that coffee tastes in your cup. So, what even is coffee processing? It's really simple, actually. A coffee bean is just the seed or the pit that's inside the coffee cherry fruit. Processing is just the name for all the steps you take to get that fruit off the seed. And how you do that? It's probably the most important decision a coffee farmer makes.
All right, path number 1 is the wet process. And as you can probably guess, it uses a ton of water. The whole goal here isn't to add flavor from the fruit, it's to wash every last bit of it away. And when you do that, what you're left with is a bean that's super clean, which lets its own natural, bright, acidic character just pop.
So here's the deal. First, machines scrub off most of the fruit pulp, but the beans are still covered in this really sticky, honey-like layer called mucilage. So they go into these big fermentation tanks where natural microorganisms basically eat away all that sticky sweetness. The result is what we call a washed coffee, and it gives you that really clean, bright, and often citrusy flavor. This is the go-to method for a lot of high-end specialty Arabicas.
Now for a completely different philosophy, the dry process. People also call this the natural process, and it's the oldest, most traditional way to do it. Instead of washing the fruit off, you just leave it on. The entire cherry is laid out to dry in the sun, kind of like making a big raisin. And here's the magic part. As that fruit dries around the bean for weeks, the bean is just soaking up all those fruity sugars and flavors. This is how you get a coffee with a really heavy body, a ton of sweetness, and those wild, complex, fruity notes. But this drying stage is super tricky. If you don't manage it perfectly, the coffee can get funky fast. You'll see this method used a lot in places like Brazil and Ethiopia. So what if you want the best of both worlds? Well, that's where the semi-dry or pulped natural process comes in. It's a brilliant hybrid. You take the outer skin off like you would in the wet process, but you leave that sticky mucilage on to dry with the bean,
kind of like the dry process. This gives you a cup that has that clean quality of a washed coffee, but with way more body and sweetness. And wow, this slide just shows it all perfectly, doesn't it? You can really see the difference. On the far left, you've got those brownish, more rustic-looking beans from the dry process. In the middle, the yellowish-brown tones from the semi-washed process. And all the way on the right, that classic greenish color of a fully washed bean. You can literally see the story of each bean's journey before it's even been roasted. It's amazing.
Okay, but we're not quite done. The work isn't over yet. Before these green beans get bagged up and shipped to roasters all over the world, they have to go through a few final, very careful steps to make sure the quality is top-notch.
First up is hulling. A machine gets rid of that last protective layer. For washed coffees, it's a papery thing called parchment, and for naturals, it's the whole dried-up husk. Then, some beans get polished to make them look prettier. After that, they get graded by size and density because, beans that are all the same size tend to roast much more evenly. And finally, they get sorted, a lot of the time by hand, to pick out any broken or discolored beans.
So, after all of that, from the farm to the processing to the final polish, how do we even know if it all worked? How can we actually taste the results of this incredible journey? Well, professionals have this whole ritual called cupping. These expert tasters, called liquorers, they evaluate everything, from the smell of the dry grounds to the flavor, the body, and the aftertaste of the brewed coffee. A really skilled cupper can taste a coffee and tell you not just what country it's from, but exactly how it was processed. They can taste the entire story in a single slurp. And here's the really cool part. There's actual chemistry behind those smells and flavors. That note of cocoa you might pick up, that's thanks to a compound called 2-methylbutanol. That fruity aroma, that could be something called 2,5-dimethylfuran. And those classic nutty, roasty notes we all know and love come from compounds called pyrazines. Each processing method helps develop different chemical compounds, creating a totally unique fingerprint for every coffee. So, we followed the path all the way from a flower on a tree to the complex raw ingredient that is a green coffee bean. Now, let's bring it all back home, right into your favorite mug. I mean, just look at this transformation. On the left, you have a simple, bright red fruit growing on a branch. And on the right, the complex, aromatic drink that basically fuels the entire planet. It really is an almost magical process, guided every single step of the way by human hands and critical choices that create its final identity.
So the next time you hold a warm cup of coffee, just take a second. Does it taste really bright and clean? You might be drinking a washed coffee. Is it super sweet and almost jammy with fruit flavor? You could be tasting a natural, dry processed bean. The story of its entire journey is right there in your cup, just waiting for you to discover it. The only question is, what will you find?
Thank you. Disclaimer. Artificial intelligence, AI, was used in the development of selected instructional materials in this lesson. The use of AI is intended to enhance clarity, visualization, and learning engagement, while all academic content has been reviewed and guided by the instructor.